Welcome back to another video on the channel. So when the huge news broke yesterday morning that Novak Djokovic would be given a medical exemption to compete at the Australian Open, my immediate thoughts went to the Australian people. First off, how would the country react, not just tennis fans, to the fact that non-vaccinated people were coming to their country to compete in a sporting event? And also, how would Novak Djokovic be received in Melbourne? He's obviously a 9-time champion, loved in Australia. Would the support ever be there for him ever again? So I wanted to get an Australian tennis fan to give their thoughts on how the country reacted as a whole. So I'm delighted to be joined by Riley. Riley, how are you? Welcome to the channel.
Hi, Dan. I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Perfect. So just to start with a couple of questions more based on Australia rather than the Djokovic situation in itself.
Yeah.
What was your instant reaction to the announcement that unvaccinated players would be allowed into Australia to compete at the Australian Open in 2022? Was it shocked and surprised?
Yeah, I was especially after the initial statements from Dan Andrews, the Victorian Premier, that tennis players and coaches and staff would only be able to attend the Australian Open if they've been double vaccinated. I was quite surprised that Djokovic was given entry, because we aren't yet aware of the reasoning behind Djokovic's exemption.
Yeah,
but clearly I was definitely quite shocked, because when the news was first announced, I thought he would have to be double vaccinated to play. Like, I was 100% certain that he would need to be vaccinated to play, and was pretty much the assumption of most people, really.
Yeah, I expected Djokovic to get vaccinated. I didn't think he would risk relying on a medical exemption to get into a tournament that he's dominated in, especially given the impact of it when he's won 20 Grand Slams along with Rafa and Roger. The vaccination would have secured his entry into all tournaments for the rest of the year. He's going to have to go through this, by the looks of it, for every single tournament now, which is going to be a risk. There's going to be some point where a tournament does reject his medical exemption, you'd expect. So I follow you with that. So what's the current situation like in Australia in terms of coronavirus stuff where you live? Is it record cases? Case numbers?
Record worst it's ever been by a considerable margin.
Right.
It's where I live currently in Queensland. We're sitting at about 6,500 plus cases a day, which is a record. It's unprecedented. We haven't been anywhere near that.
Yeah.
Not throughout this entire 2-year ordeal. For Victoria, they've got about 15,000, 17,000 cases a day, which is another record for them, unfortunately. That's where the Australian Open will be held. So they've been on lockdown now for the better part of about 18 months in Victoria. So to see, obviously, Djokovic come in, even despite the anonymity, to see Djokovic come in, for them will be very disheartening and frustrating.
Yeah.
So the public reception has not been popular at all. It's been met with a lot of grief and anger.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, do you think the response has been from the Australian public on a whole, not just in terms of tennis fans, that a lot of people are saying it's been a kick in the face for the people that have been, locked down for so long, and you're allowing people from different countries to travel into the country unvaccinated.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a very bold move, I think, from Tennis Australia. So what do you think the overall reaction has been in Australia? Is it of anger?
Extremely, yeah, because Australian citizens have been deprived of, first of all, leaving the border or seeing dying family members or other people with illnesses. It's been or attending funerals even. It's been a very difficult process for those people, especially in Victoria. I haven't had too many issues myself, but I do have to be double vaccinated to go and attend restaurants, attend cafes, cinemas, leave the state. So for those people who have been in constant lockdown, it's extremely frustrating for them.
Yeah. So just some key points now, looking at the Djokovic case in particular. I think I've read 95 out of the top 100 players in the ATP are fully vaccinated. So far, we know Djokovic is not one of those. He was granted the medical exemption. Tennis Sangren as well, I believe, is also not vaccinated, but didn't apply for a medical exemption because he didn't meet any of the criteria on the list. So we can safely presume, I think, the 3 of the players in the top 100 that are at Australian Open medical exemptions. They've went
very few.
Independent process, firstly reviewed by Tennis Australia, then went to an independent medical exemption review panel held in Victoria. After reading that statement there, I can't really understand why people suggest Djokovic has received preferential treatment, and I highly doubt if the Victorian health officials, cardiologists and stuff, are reviewing them, then I highly doubt there'll be any room for loopholes on the exemption list. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, despite the general consensus that Djokovic may have bought his ticket into the Australian Open. The Victorian government have been the strictest in the entire country, and they aren't disingenuous in any way, and neither's Djokovic's medical exemption should not be regarded as suspicious either. The only issue would be the validity of Djokovic's actual medical issue, whatever it may be, because that has not been corroborated yet by a third party. So that's where the focus is going to be shifting within the next day or two now.
Yeah, I heard Craig Tiley say this morning that it would probably settle a lot of things if Djokovic was to come out and reveal why he received the medical exemption. But you can argue it's a private matter at the end of the day. He's still a human being.
It is, yeah.
If he was to do it, then should every other player in the draw come up and reveal theirs as well?
Yeah.
Or focusing on Djokovic because he's world number one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, he'll have different treatment because of the circumstances, because of his profile, because he's been such a prominent anti-vaxxer.
Yeah,
I suppose. People will just think that he's bought his way into the Australian Open. But yeah, it's difficult. Look, if he's gone through an independent process, he should really, if he's met the criteria to play, he should be able to play, and he shouldn't be vilified for that because he didn't create the medical exemption. Ultimately, the presence of the medical exemption is probably what should be debated, not whether Djokovic can play.
Yeah, I completely agree. So just moving on that, a few tweets, presumably from Australia. After everything Victorians have been through, Novak Djokovic getting a vaccine exemption is nothing short of a kick in the guts. All those lockdowns, all that suffering, seriously. Just an example of the anger from Australians at the moment, which you can completely understand, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So how do you think the crowd will react to Novak Djokovic in Melbourne? I don't think it's going to be revealed.
He'll get booed. He'll almost certainly. It'll be extremely hostile for him.
So do you think the timing of the announcement as well have an impact on that? You know, if this was all rectified a couple of months ago, then it
particularly with Omicron. Yeah, particularly with the new variant Omicron, it's extremely poor timing. Yeah. Very, very, very poor. But he's met the criteria to play, so he's perfectly entitled to play, and he doesn't have to reveal anything if he doesn't want to. But it is in, despite being a Djokovic fan myself, it is in his best interest that he does.
Yeah, I can't imagine that other players that are going to come out and reveal that they've got medical exemptions after the backlashes Djokovic has had, so he's sort of carrying that himself, which I think as well have an impact on him. I hope, in a way, he doesn't get booed, but I think you'd be expecting the backlash. On the other hand, though, as I've got a point there, I agree with people saying that Djokovic does have a responsibility as the world number one in a huge sport to represent the sport well. You know, does he deserve any of the part of the blame here for not getting vaccinated and bringing the sport into dispute, or does he have as much right as any other player in the draw to request a medical exemption?
Yeah, of course he does. It's not up to him. He hasn't. If he made, the liability lies with the Victorian government, Tennis Australia, and the Australian government. And the presence of the medical exemptions means that he's allowed to, by right, apply for one. And if he's been given permission to play, which he has, then he hasn't broken any protocols, hasn't broken any laws, hasn't gone through a loophole, despite what some may suggest. He is entitled to play if that's been approved by two independent, anonymous medical panels of experts. He's approved to play. So no, Djokovic will be the scapegoat for this situation, but he is not to blame as he hasn't. There's nothing inherently wrong with what he has done.
Yeah. Right, so I'm just going to move on to that picture you just sent me before we got underway of, you know, some people actually supporting Djokovic, that he stood up and got to Australia unvaccinated and got through the medical exemption process. Would you say it undermines the vaccine and reinvigorates the anti-vaccine movement? Will some Australians not be vaccinated because of this, or are the majority understanding of the situation and some even supporting his stance on it?
Yeah, look, there's a bit of the vast majority of people are vaccinated. So in my state, we're looking at 86% compliance, double vaccination. In Victoria, it's about 92, 93, which is quite high, which is great. But yeah, this will undoubtedly fuel the anti-vaccine movement for sure. They'll use him as a leader in some ways, really, because he's been able to get into the country and not have any repercussions for it, despite not being vaccinated. When virtually all other players have to be.
So although it'll likely stay private, due to, we said, being his medical records, I can't imagine Djokovic coming out and revealing why he's got the medical exemption. He may if he gets a huge backlash, especially, in the first week of the Australian Open. But I think, personally, Australian people who have sacrificed their lives for a couple of years, being locked down, as you mentioned there, not being able to go to funerals and stuff, this is not just a case of Novak Djokovic. I think it's more than that. People who haven't been vaccinated deserve... if they are coming to Australia, the Australian public deserve an explanation as to why that's happening. And I don't think enough's been communicated with the fans and the people of Australia. So what do you think at this point has to happen next?
For Djokovic, whether or not he will is up for debate, but he should come out and explicitly state what the process has been like and what the reasoning is for his medical exemption. If he doesn't, it will reflect terribly on him, and he will not have receptions that will be favourable for him in the future.
Yeah.
At all. Not this one, the Australian Open 2 years from now, it will be remembered. So it is absolutely in his best interest that he comes out and discusses the circumstances behind his medical exemption.
Yeah, at the end of the day, he's the spokesperson for them all, isn't he? Being the world number one, he's he's the person who people are going to listen to at the end of the day. So I think he has to come out and explain, as you say, what the process was like, why people receive medical exemptions, what they'll be doing to ensure the safety of the public as much as possible. And I think if he just keeps quiet, it's just going to fester and probably get worse and worse as the tournament progresses.
That's right. If he stays quiet, then people will just assume that someone was paid along the way to get him in. It will certainly reflect badly on him at his reputation if he doesn't discuss it openly.
Yeah, so just for an overall conclusion, I'm personally still a little bit torn in the situation. I can understand the argument that Djokovic does deserve some blame. He hasn't represented the sport well. It was a terrible day yesterday for tennis after what was a very strong couple of years. I think they've done very well to get the major tournaments on in difficult circumstances with coronavirus. But on the other hand, he is in his rights to apply, and he just wants to win tennis tournaments and become the greatest player ever. I think, personally, the majority of the blame has to go on officials if you feel that the situation is wrong. Djokovic requested the exemption and they approved it. If they had rejected it, Djokovic wouldn't be playing the Australian Open. So I think it's a complete mess. Doesn't look good for tennis. I think this whole situation should have been sorted a lot sooner. Australian people deserve an explanation why unvaccinated players have been allowed to compete. So what's just your final overall take on the whole situation?
Look, as disappointing as it may be for some, ultimately Djokovic he's allowed the due process, isn't he, to apply for an application he's been given approval, so he is allowed to play. If he's not breaking protocol, isn't breaking laws, he's absolutely allowed to play at the Australian Open. The only blame, in my opinion, that would rest with him would be resolving his vaccination status months ago, after the Paris Masters, after the ATP World Tour Finals. He had several opportunities to come out and discuss what the process will be like for the Australian Open this year, but chose not to, and that's led to so much criticism and a lack of clarity for several weeks now, which has resulted in nationwide backlash.
Yeah, I completely agree. On to the tournament now. I think, if you look at the tournament now, Novak Djokovic is in it. It's going to be a better Australian Open. So
yes, it will be.
Let's just hope everyone stays fit throughout the tournament and we get treated to a fantastic event, which we all look forward to. So
yes,
thanks for coming on the channel and explaining what the current situation is like in Australia and giving your thoughts of the Australian people as well. So take care, and thanks again.
Thank you for having me.